As somebody who doesn't really use Limbo that much, his rework was really kind of attractive to me because they've added a passive to him where basically by rolling it will, I'm assuming it's from rolling, they didn't actually say, but it says something about replacing the ability to roll with this. It will be a passive that will make Limbo go in and out of the rift by himself. So you casting Banish on yourself, or Rift Walk as it used to be called, isn't a thing anymore. It's now a passive. So that looks pretty cool because obviously if you're in trouble you can quickly jump into your passive and you can't take hits from enemies who aren't in the rift with you. And that leads on to Banish being the ability that banishes enemies into the rift. The best thing about this is it's now an AoE cast, which means when you cast it on enemies, you can cast the kind of demonstrated either 5 or 6 enemies going into it, and secretly I'm hoping it does have a number on it, so you cast it on a group of 20 or 30 enemies for crowd control. It only takes some of them into the rift, otherwise things can get a bit overwhelming. But the fact that it works on more than just one means that Banish is now going to be more useful, because trying to just stay in the rift and bring one person over at a time for crowd control, this was always pretty bad, which is one of the reasons I never really used Limbo that much. But Rift Walk is now being replaced with something called Stasis, which will basically, it's a stop time ability, and anybody that's in the rift, or anybody you have banished, brought over to the rift or inside of a cataclysm, will freeze. Their projectiles will stop, and this is going to be very useful as well, but your projectiles are also stopped, so you can actually set up attacks on enemies knowing that they're going to start to move again. Your projectiles will then hit them, which is great, but you have to then cast Stasis again to unfreeze time, which can be problematic. I'm hoping not though, it does look really promising. The Stasis looks really promising as well because they've added kind of a limit to how many enemies you can have inside of this, which, as I said about Banish, doesn't look like they have. I'm hoping there is, but they didn't confirm anything. Stasis does, and when it's reached, it will basically, the ability will stop, releasing everything back to normal time, and it will then have a counter, a cooldown counter, and you won't be able to cast it again until that has obviously finished. Rift Surge still kind of works the same as it did before. Enemies inside of a cataclysm or who have been banished, enemies in the rift, when you use this they will now, it said something about charging enemies, and they referred to it kind of like Nova's molecular prime. But if you kill them when you have Rift Surge on them and they have this lightning effect around them, it will shoot the lightning into or out of the rift to the material plane and actually damage enemies on both sides of the rift. So the ones you have killed will damage them on the normal side, but obviously you've dealt the damage to do that in the first place. That's what I meant by both sides of the rift. Then there's also the whole fact that enemies who are also affected by Rift Surge, if they cross the boundary of a cataclysm and exit the rift, they will create a mini cataclysm. I think it was something like a quarter of the size of the normal cataclysm, and these mini ones will also be affected by Stasis. So it'll also be affected, so you can freeze them in these mini ones as well, which means there's going to be little pockets of the rift all over the place. Cataclysm itself will of course be staying the same. It did say that they've added the AoE damage to it. It will now knock enemies over when you cast it, which is something I thought it used to do. When you first cast it, they would take damage when they first entered it, not knock them over, but the fact it knocks them over is quite useful. Not only that, but the final collapse damage will happen both in and out of the rift, so as it collapses, it will damage everybody. Hopefully they will leave the toggle on Cataclysm, otherwise that, well, it'll ruin it. When Limbo first came out, Cataclysm was, once you cast it, it's there until it's gone. the fact that you could toggle it was a massive improvement. The only real questions that were not really answered to Limbo's rework is, when is it going to happen? Hopefully not until it's complete, because a half-complete rework wouldn't really go down that well. And it wasn't, they did say it wasn't quite finished yet, so hopefully next week we'll find out obviously when it does turn up, but it's being done, it will eventually turn up. And of course, the passive, they said that it's going to cost 0 energy, but it might cost energy in the future. It didn't cost energy when it was being shown, but it will cost in the future. This kind of takes it out of the realm of a passive, in my opinion, because how can you call it a passive if it costs you to use it? No other passive in the game really does that, so it depends. If it's like 5 energy, yeah, okay, it's not really that much, but at the same time, if you haven't got the 5 energy and you go to use it, it's not going to be there. So I'm torn whether I like the passive, because they did say that it might cost power when it comes out. That's the only thing I didn't particularly like. The passive I like, the Stasis I liked, the change to the AoE attack for Banish. Really looking forward to that. This is a rework that I'm really looking forward to, because a lot of the problems with Limbo seem to have been addressed with this, and Limbo's always been that frame that is very useful, but nobody really uses because the powers don't quite do what they should have done, and this is going to address everything and just make him a much better frame. But anyway, we'll leave this off here for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.